Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 3rd, 2019. Time for yet another show. Time for yet another month. These things also keep coming, no matter what you do with these calendars or clocks. There's apparently no way to prevent this from continuing, though we are trying mightily and striving towards it. Relatively good day today, as I mentioned in the Morning Post. Donald Trump is not in this country. That's usually a pretty good day by comparison. I mean, he's off embarrassing us elsewhere, but, you know, he's not here and bored and rage tweeting Fox News in the morning. In fact, he's rage tweeting that he can't get Fox News. He was very upset this morning that CNN appears to be the standard for American news over in England. And, I mean, it's not helping them any with Brexit. We should be reporting on that. Then maybe they would get be able to figure out what's going on there. But he's all upset that he can't get his Fox. I'm sure they will import it for him somehow and hook up some satellite or bring him some old tapes of Fox or the Gorilla Channel or something like that and keep him entertained for the rest of his short and stupid and pointless trip there. He's having a state visit, which are frequently pointless and stupid, but his seems to be particularly pointless and stupid. He's doing next to nothing and helicoptering everywhere so that he is not exposed to ridicule and protest wherever he goes in London. And remember, I think this was a trip that he wanted to engineer mostly to get a ride in the royal golden carriage with the Queen. And he's not having that. And so I'm not certain whether he thinks the whole thing is a waste of time or not. But seems to have crammed it in regardless. I thought originally that he was going to be there. And maybe is he going to be on a different overseas trip and maybe also back in London during the July 4th holiday? Is that what I read? Or wasn't he planning a big parade or something like that? A big celebration of America. He came up with the idea to celebrate America on July 4th in the National Mall. I don't know where I got the idea that he was going to be there on July 4th. Maybe, I don't know. He's going to be there on June 4th. Maybe I misread it or someone else misread it and said it, and I just picked it up. I don't know. Anyway, I guess it doesn't really matter. He's not here now, and we should enjoy it. As I said, he crammed the visit in between golf on Saturday. I'm sorry, I guess on Sunday. And then a quick trip to a church. Not his church, but a church. Because we are, of course, under the cloud of another mass shooting event. On Friday, was it? Yeah. Down in Virginia Beach. I think it must have, I guess, I don't know, did we get note of it while we were on the air? I think it might have been afterwards. But another major event, several people killed. This one was very interesting in a way, just watching, and they're all interesting in a way, I guess. Don't want to pay too much attention to it so that so that the shooter doesn't get any attention. The guy's dead. And it sounded pretty typical in the sense of several people reported dead, several more reported wounded, and the gunman dead. And initial thoughts, I'm sure, for everybody went to another AR-15 shooting. But no, as it turns out, this one, a .45 caliber handgun. And then there was a brief round of, I think, of gun enthusiasts saying, see, you can't demonize AR-15s now, because here is a handgun, which everybody loves. No. But which everybody loves, and we don't fight against anymore because we're too busy focusing on AR-15s and other assault weapons. That has done just as much damage as an AR-15 ever did during a mass shooting. So this was some sort of redemptive point. Though it did turn out that there was an interesting twist to it. Apparently, he had a .45 semi-automatic and a silencer, or I guess as they call it more technically, a suppressor. And as we've discussed on the show, we've learned along the way, silencers don't, like in the movies, silencers make this guns essentially silent. They make I don't know where they came up with this sound effect for it, but universally in the movies, the silencers make a little pew sound so that you can tell something happened on screen. I think it's sound editors just saying you need some kind of noise, which is, I mean, you do if you want it to be realistic, because apparently silencers don't silence the guns. They suppress the noise. They make it a lot less loud, but it sounds just like a regular gunshot. It's a loud bang. It's just not as super loud as it usually is. But anyway, it does significantly suppress the sound. And as a result, you had people lobbying in state legislatures around the country. And I noticed some complaints about Tennessee having done this. They sold the idea of legalizing, or at least liberalizing, the ability to purchase suppressors by selling them as hearing protection devices. People are going to shoot. It's in their constitution. If you want to, you can shoot, but it could hurt your ears. And so people need the freedom to get suppressors so they don't damage their hearing while they're practicing the murder hobby. So that's how they got silencers through. And of course, when people said, that creates something of a problem. We have a mass shooting issue in this country as it is. And, I hear there's somebody's got a dog out there somewhere today. It's not even Abby. We don't have Greg Dworkin with us today. I should note, everybody who's waiting for Greg, you can head to the exits right now. We'll be missing him for Monday, presumably back on Wednesday. But that's not even Abby barking in the background. That's just neighbor dog barking in the background. I think it's lawnmower day out here. So we may have some trouble with background sound here in our luxurious soundproof booth inside Kagro in the Morning World headquarters. We don't really have those kinds of luxuries. We have to deal with whatever noise is going on in the neighborhood, including gunfire occasionally. But so down in Virginia Beach, the guy had a suppressor on his weapon and his .45, and apparently that causes big problems in the mass shooting context. That is to say, you don't hear the usual warning shots. And they're not meant as warning shots, of course, but you don't get the warning of gunfire going off someplace and triggering in your mind, I need to deal with an active shooter here. I need to run, hide, fight, whatever they tell you to do. All of our active shooter training in schools, in office places, in public buildings, wherever they do these things, it is premised on hearing gunshots and reacting to it. And if you don't hear those shots ringing out, people don't start making for the exits. You can wander through a building and shoot a dozen people with, you can do it just fine with your trusty handgun, and you don't need an AR-15 to exact that kind of a toll quickly before people can make it to the exits. So, a little bit of a problem there, and just sort of compounding the tragedy. I should scroll back. I'm sure it was Saturday or Sunday that I saw somebody tweeting about this, but, just generally making the comment about, I said this was going to happen, and they said, you're crazy. You're just making things up. Here it is. Beth Jocelyn Roth, who is the Safe Tennessee Project Policy Director and co-founder of the Children's Firearms Safety Alliance down there in Tennessee, and saying in 2017, when the Tennessee legislature was discussing the, quote, Tennessee Hearing Protection Act, I suggested that suppressors could delay victim reaction time and make it harder for law enforcement to locate an active shooter. I was mocked and told that would never happen. So you know exactly what happens next is it happens next. This was from 2017. It took 2 years to find out that, she was completely right. Washington Post actually did a story on it over the weekend. And here it is. Why the shooting in Virginia Beach sets an ominous precedent. And the one answer is He shot a lot of people, and that's terrible. 12 people were killed. I think another like 15 or so wounded. And by the way, well, let me read you the article because I'm pretty sure they'll probably cover all of this stuff. Juliette Kayyem wrote this piece June 1st. That's Saturday. Juliette, a former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security and is faculty chair of the Homeland Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, which I think everybody loves on a bipartisan basis. We might as well add that. What ends lives, she begins? Gunfire. That is true. What saves lives? The sound of gunfire. The Virginia Beach shooting on Friday, when an employee of the city government killed 12 people, 11 of whom were his co-workers, is notable only for its familiarity. Another mass shooting. In fact, it was the worst mass casualty event anyone can remember since November 2018 at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks, California, which probably everybody has forgotten by now. That's the point, of course. But details of the rampage include one fact unique to the growing list of active shooter cases. It's got a couple, actually. The assailant used a .45 caliber handgun with extended magazines, that's a key point, and a barrel suppressor. This small detail, that the loaded gun was fitted with a simple and lawful silencing equipment, threatens to upend how we understand and train for active shooter cases in the future. Gun violence in America is unique not simply because of our culture, but also because we have lawful weaponry that can kill many people very quickly. In terms of death to time ratio, single shot weapons are preferable to multi-round handguns, and handguns are preferable to semi-automatic. That's not really actually an accurate thing. I mean, handguns can often be, and very often are, semi-automatic, but let me see, did I read that right? Make sure if I've got that correct. And single shot weapons obviously preferable to multi-round handguns, and handguns are preferable to the semi-automatic, and the favorite of mass shooters is the AR-15. It's simple calculation of time, but of course a semi-automatic pistol can fire every bit as fast as the AR-15, including bump firing the thing. That is true, and I'll have to remind you that again. Handguns aren't non-semi-automatic weapons. I mean, that's like absolutely the typical weapon sold in the stores today, handgun-wise. A semi-automatic handgun, sure, absolutely. I don't know why they let that mistake go. But the Virginia Beach killer seemed to want the anonymity of silence, a tool of the coward. Well, so's a .45 caliber handgun, quite honestly. Not one seeking fame or a blaze of glory. None of the videos or manifestos we've seen from New Zealand to Las Vegas appear to be part of the Virginia Beach story. The killer wanted silence. And it is sort of as mass shootings go, it is sort of an old school mass shooting. The workplace mass shooting is, by a disgruntled employee is like old timey at this point, quite honestly. Okay. Silence is the enemy of time. An entire run, hide, fight policy that governs every school, workforce, and first responder community in active shooter cases is conditioned on an important premise that there is situational awareness that shots have been fired, bullets are flying, and it's always best to run the other way. Once you know where the bullets are coming from, you can, as I tell my own kids, sprint if you can, duck if you can't, and fight only if you must. I have only one of each of you, right? That's what she says to her kids. Bystanders can run from the gunfire only if they know where it's coming from. That was a big problem in the Las Vegas shooting. The shooting was coming from such a tremendous distance, it was difficult to see where it was coming from, and shots were echoing everywhere, and bullets just raining down on a crowd. There was really no way to tell at first where all the shooting was coming from, but eventually they figured it out. For first responders, I think I skipped a little bit here. Bystanders can only run from gunfire if they know where it's coming from. This is why the best active shooter training focuses on access to building or school exits and open but protected spaces so that potential victims can get out of the way. For first responders, in a world that has adapted to lessons learned in school shootings, they no longer assume a potential hostage situation and now are trained to run toward the gunfire, assuming, of course, they know where it is. As Jonathan Kagro, a former Secret Service agent, told me, this is a major shift in the attack methodology. Now, absent having the situational awareness that an attack is taking place due to the sound of recognizable gunfire, we must reconfigure our ability to identify the immediate threat along with the corresponding response. Survival is all about sound. In a society with no movement toward sensible gun control measures, the flight and or fight reaction is one of the few elements in an attack that citizens can control. In some instances, flight is not possible. In other instances, potential victims engage. Recently, for example, in North Carolina and Colorado, brave bystanders have decided they had no choice but to, quote, fight if you must. Delaying the killer's spree, both young men saved the lives of others but died as a result. It is true that suppressors do not quiet guns. Industry experts often cringe at the popular reference to silencers. Instead, suppressors act like a car muffler. Both devices were pioneered by the same inventor, Hiram Percy Maxim. By cooling and dissipating the gases that emanate from the chamber as the trigger is being pulled. That alters the sound enough that the gunshot's normal sound, a suppressed gunshot, can sound like a chair scraping the floor, is difficult to identify. All right, an interesting take on that. Suppressors are legal in 42 states, though they are regulated under the National Firearms Act and therefore are treated like other specialty gun accessories, including requiring a background check and a $200 tax. Recently, making suppressors more easily accessible has become a focal point of gun rights activists, even though it's not a gun, who want to increase dwindling gun sales, and hunting groups who argue that suppressors are actually a health necessity in that they reduce hearing loss. I mean, earplugs do the trick too, but whatever. As recently as June 2017, the then Republican majority House was considering a law to make the regulation of suppressors less onerous. You know, for the sake of the auditory sensitivities of shooters. One mass shooting with a suppressor does not make a trend, nor does it require us to alter how we train for or respond to them, but it does mean we must continue to vigorously regulate and even eventually ban these devices as essential steps in adopting common sense gun control measures. Gun rights advocates are correct when they say laws will not end all gun violence, but they never finish that thought. Finish a lot of them, honestly. Our gun safety goal and homeland security goal must be to minimize the increasing likelihood that lots of people can be killed in a matter of minutes with no capacity for escape or rescue. To protect life, time is of the essence, and sound adds precious seconds. So, just something, to be aware of. I also understand from initial reports that it took several cops in full body armor to finally bring this shooting to a halt. The good guys with a gun who stopped the shooter, it wasn't, I figured when you see those stories, it's typically once the cops arrive, the guy shoots himself. But apparently, I guess he didn't. And it took SWAT teams and cops in full body armor emptying their weapons to stop this guy. And, of course, the takeaway from that is the idea that your typical middle school algebra teacher is going to be able to do that for you with no additional casualties in the classroom is pretty ridiculous. But I think you probably knew that. All right, yeah. Well, I didn't even really enter into things with the idea of using this as the lead-off story, but that's probably most appropriate. And I was sparked to do it, actually. I mean, I put aside these stories about the silencers, which they hate being called silent. I guess they hate that. So I should just say it a lot. I'm going to call them the USS John McCain silencers and see how many people cringe every time I do it. Anyway, like I said, I was motivated to pick up this story this morning by the fact that Trump hit the golf course yesterday, and then I guess on his way home from the Virginia golf course, he realized, oh yeah, wasn't there a mass shooting like over the weekend, I should offer thoughts and prayers at some point. And he stopped in at the McLean Bible Church in order to do that. I should point out, as many people have in piecemeal fashion over Twitter this morning, I have some personal knowledge of the logistics here. The McLean Bible Church, for one thing, as others have pointed out, it is widely known in the area as the evangelical, the conservative Republican evangelical mega church where, so I guess we could say, some of the world's most evil Washington, D.C. area Republicans attend church. It's not in McLean. Maybe it has its roots in McLean. It draws its congregation from McLean, which is one of the, I guess, the poshest close-in suburb that has like enormous houses still available. Very posh. Very much, used to be very much, sort of almost horsey country, but I guess it's gotten too built up since then. So that's the place where you park yourself as a defense lobbyist, senator. Sometimes senators, who are wealthy people will buy a nice McMansion in McLean and commute into the city there. Newt Gingrich lives there. Everybody who's anybody. McLean was, and has been for a long time, just sort of a seat of wealth and power in an area dominated by wealth and power. Lots of people live closer, of course, Alexandria, Arlington, etc. But those are mostly Democratic and liberal bastions. Not that there aren't prominent conservatives who live there, but if you had just a little bit more money and you wanted, a McMansion or maybe a little horse property, you'd move out a little bit further towards McLean. These days, a little further out than that to Great Falls, which is probably about where, the edge of Great Falls is probably where the McLean Bible Church now actually sits. Anyway, so it's a big mega church. I think somebody also mentioned Ken Starr's church as well. This is the kind of audience you draw. Although they are in big competition with the area Opus Dei, Latin Mass, Catholic churches that draw particularly the political converts to Catholicism, and I think that's probably where you'd find Newt Gingrich. I know that's Rick Santorum's preferred place. Anyway, McLean Bible Church, for logistical purposes, and how does Donald Trump get there? He may know many of the congregants who go there. They may have urged him to come by. But most important, if you are leaving what is now Trump National Golf Course in Virginia, it used to be known locally as the Lowe's Island Golf Course, Lowe's Island Country Club. If you were leaving there and driving back to Washington, D.C., to the White House, the McLean Bible Church is literally just the largest church that you will pass on your way back to the White House without deviating a whit from your route. I don't know that the president drives every time. I've seen it a couple of times. I think he does basically drive. It's weird. He's helicoptered out here a couple of times, but not, I don't think for golf. Although he has played golf after a helicopter. He's come out to do an event out here and then played golf afterwards. So I'm not sure whether they have a standard operating procedure for getting him out here by car or whatever. Anyway, if you're driving back to the White House, you will drive right past the McLean Bible Church, literally on the route that you will take, and you can see it. And I think what happened is he might have said, oh yeah, so-and-so goes to this church. Pull in here. I'm going to make an impromptu visit. Now, I don't know what drew him in there. Was it somebody reminding him, oh yeah, you should do the thoughts and prayers thing for the mass shooting? Or could it have been that on Sunday, I think Franklin Graham announced a couple days before that Sunday would be a big national day of prayer for the president. Everybody's going to pray for the president because he's a horrible disaster and he's going to hell. And they figured, what the hell, we should pray for him along the way. I'm not really sure what motivated. I think they thought better of him, but I'm figuring they must know he's going to hell, right? Although they could be clueless, I don't think they know they're going. So anyway, they had a national day of prayer, pray for the president. The president showed up, and we've seen the video online and stills from the video, which make him look like, oh my God, I have to put together a collection. He just loves standing and walking normally, this guy. The collection you could put together. Anyway, so in he goes. Somebody commented on a still taken from the video that he looks like a practice wax dummy, and he does. I don't know. It was just a terrible freeze frame from a video, and you can always catch somebody unawares on that. But he was grimy from his golf game. He had his hat on still. He managed to throw a jacket on, but he didn't manage to change clothes or even change out of his golf shoes. Now, if you're driving from Trump National back to the White House, it's at least, I mean, even with police escort, it's good 10 minutes between the golf club and McLean Bible Church, maybe even a little more, waiting for people to get out of your way. Even with road closures, though, I suppose it'll still take you a couple of minutes. You can change your shoes in the back of a limo, but I guess he doesn't even bother bringing them with him. It probably was impromptu, but and he goes to church. That's a casual dressed church, I think. The pastor certainly is casually dressed there all the time, but I think members of the congregation put on a little bit more of their Sunday best before heading out to church. But here's grimy, sweaty Trump with the hat head, and he does only once on stage there, and you have to call it a stage, at a facility as large as the McLean Bible Church. He's wandering up, and he's still got the hat on. And people are like, church hat, that here. So he takes off the hat. You see the disgusting hair in its natural state. And he didn't say anything. He stayed for all of 15 minutes, didn't say anything, so he didn't talk about Virginia Beach, and instead stayed for them to offer a prayer about him. What a fantastic reaction. Could you ask for better? Anything more? That's peak Trump, honestly. All right, we'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By the way, some claim that the still that I saw circulating from the video of Trump was doctored in some way. And I am not certain whether it was or not, but past caring, of course. Besides which, I have heard that doctored is good now and that it's all fine. Oh, here come the lawnmowers. Can you hear that? That's kind of soothing. I should make it into one of those. Can I make money making what was it, ASMR videos? I put this on YouTube, just me listening to the lawnmower whine outside. It's not the groundkeepers from Trump National. Anyway, some claim that the still was doctored. It's possible, but it would be a very, very light touch that they put on it, because it looks to me, having seen the video, I think you could absolutely reproduce that still without much trouble. They may have oranged up his face a little bit, but every other bit of it appears to be true. So I don't know. And like I said, as we now know, Facebook says doctored is A-OK. So truth means nothing, and we don't have to worry about it. If you watch the video, you'll see for yourself. Let's see. I guess the thing to do here at this point, having said that, is to write a note to myself to share with you the video. And I have to do a note because I found that trying to remember afterwards what I said I was going to share with you is impossible, and I can never remember what it is. Occasionally, I get lucky, and even though I forget to include a link to it, Scott Anderson says, I was listening to the show, I heard you say you wanted to include this, I will get that link for you. But just as frequently, just in and out of my own head. Anyway, I'm looking at a still here being shared of him just sort of standing there with his Il Duce pout on his face. Hats off now, hair. You know what? Honestly, slicked back. It's like slicked back makes it sound like that was a plan, but plastered back by sweat and a hat. It actually doesn't look that bad. It actually looks a lot less ridiculous than his hair as he prepares it ordinarily. That swoosh, sweeping comb over thing. This actually looks like he doesn't require a comb over, and a person with hair like his, straight back, like Eric wears it. I'm not like he's a fashion icon or anything, but that's Ivanka, everybody, duh. But I mean, he looks okay. He looks fairly normal. I mean, the rest of him is pretty schlumpy. He really does look like a rumpled mess here. And he's suffering a little bit from a little grandpa waistline here. He's got the pants pulled up, I'd say nipple height, I'm guessing. It's not, but it's belly button are over. And the belt has sunken down a little bit from the waistline of the not jeans. He's wearing like khakis. And so there's some considerable real estate there above the belt, which, there shouldn't be. And, otherwise, what is that? Like a blue polo shirt of some kind, like a darker royal blue, maybe. Blue blazer on top. I mean, ordinarily a classic older preppy man's perhaps post-country club garb, but he just looks like crap in it, and then he's got the pants up way up high. Anyhow, so there he is offering, he's on hand for prayers to be offered to, or rather about him. I think probably was hoping there would be prayers to him, but prayers for the president on the mass shooting, weekend. So whatever, that seems really super good. There are some musicians in the background up on the stage too. There's a woman, a violinist right behind him, that if you catch the video just the right moment, you see her giving him the eye, like, oh my God, I can't believe this idiot is here. There's a couple other of the musicians are sort of clapping for him with one hand. They're holding violins in one hand at rest, and they're sort of clapping on their thighs, tapping their hands on their legs to make a clapping noise. She's not the only one either. Anyhow, I just thought, well, an interesting weekend around here. Let's see. Some comments that have come through since the show began or just before. Michael Musson commenting that Alabama has a great solution for the gun suppressor story. Gun ownership should require admitting privileges at the hospital, sonograms of all potential victims, and long prison sentences for gun dealers. It's an idea we can build off of and see if we can't get that one done. By the way, also reminded of the big story going into the weekend, which just ended up getting worse. Bill had sent his morning tweet from all the way from Portland, Maine, of course, and letting us know, of course, that the show was live, but pointing out that our plan for the show today was, of course, welcoming you to the month of June, which he points out is named for Juno, goddess of throwing tarps over things that might provoke a Zeus temper tantrum. I think over the weekend, the Navy, at first having denied that they had anything whatsoever to do with the hiding of the McCain, now sort of come around to we did get that request, and yeah, there was a tarp hanging over things that had the name USS John McCain on them. I've taken to just tweeting to Trump, John McCain, nothing else, every once in a while, and you should also do the same. Just share the name with him. But yeah, the new excuse, I guess, is that there was a tarp over the name John McCain on something. I think the boat itself, did they hide it? Did they send it back out to sea? And maybe some of the things that remained behind in port may have had the name on it. And they hung tarps over it, which was pretty amazing. And just indicative of the extent to which they were going to prevent Trump from having a temper tantrum because he saw the name John McCain, which, by the way, I don't know why the press isn't picking up on the opportunity to label this what it is. He's got McCain derangement syndrome, right? All those years, I mean, it's gone both ways. Parties labeling one another as so-and-so derangement syndrome. When we were mad about George W. Bush, it was Bush derangement syndrome. It was a feeble effort by some in the media to reverse things during the Obama administration, where they kept saying, he's a tyrant. He's taking over the world. The Obama derangement syndrome. But nobody's talking about Trump derangement syndrome all that much. Occasionally, his defenders will do that. But he's got McCain derangement syndrome, and McCain's dead. And it's gotten worse since he died. So maybe he's being haunted by John McCain. That would be justice, I think. Anyway, lots going on which we really have to catch up on. Some of it's in Pocket, some of it's in Twitter, some of it will occur to us along the way. Some of it is directly political, some of it is tangential. Let's see what we got. This gives me an excuse. Big story this morning out of the New York Times on Elaine Chao, who of course is married, they say, to Mitch McConnell. That is the name of the ceremony they performed. So we give them the benefit of the doubt and say, I'm sure everybody's very happy in that marriage. I have been waiting for the opportunity to let you know that Elaine Chao, that Mitch McConnell is married to a Chinese pirate for a long, long time. And of course, we shouldn't say these things about her. She's an American citizen, to be sure, I think, although I've never seen her paperwork. Got to be honest about that. And I guess they figured, well, she must be an American. She's been Secretary of Labor before, right? So we don't need to vet her and whatever. Even I really thought her confirmation hearing should have lasted longer. She wanted to be Secretary of Transportation, and her family business is transportation, and you should look into that. Well, someone did. It's a little late, but someone finally did. And I think the description that Eric Lipton put out about his work on this article, I should probably find that too. And he tweeted this around as well. And he described, I think, the atmosphere out of which the story was born. Here it is. Let's see. There's a couple of tweets to it. Let's see. Gonna have to back up a little bit more. Wow, he's been going on as he should. It's a good piece. Wow. I've been tweeting about it for quite a while. Anyway, the point really is, here we are. No, is it even at the beginning of the thread? No, beginning of another thread. Anyway, basically he was saying, when she was being vetted, here we are, finally. It's 14 hours old. That's how come. The New York Times heard way back in October of 2017. It is now, of course, where are we? June of 2019. New York Times heard way back in October of 2017 that State Department officials had raised ethics concerns about a pending trip by Department of Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao to China. After we asked about the trip, it was canceled. We sued the State Department to get the emails. Here is the result. And it is this story, a quote, bridge to China and her family's business in the Trump cabinet. Elaine Chao has boosted the profile of her family's shipping company, which benefits from industrial policies in China that are roiling the Trump administration. I mean, there's a lot going on in this story. But I mean, the basic idea of her being moved to transportation was, I can use this to leverage lots and lots of money for my family from out of China. And so she has. And here we are. Now, one of the things I noticed about this piece is that I believe it reveals another matrix glitch for Oliver Willis's continuing investigation. Let me give you the first couple paragraphs of the story. You'll get the sense of it. I don't think we're going to make it all the way through the story, even if we wanted to make it the focus of the day. Michael Forsyth, Eric Lipton, Keith Bradsher, and Sui Lee Wee are the authors of this June 2nd piece, again in the New York Times. Let's see. Let me read you I'll even begin with the caption of the photo of her. It is, of course, a picture of Elaine Chao. The Transportation Secretary oversees the American maritime industry, among other things. Her family's shipping company, Foremost Group, has deep ties to the Chinese elite. So, an excellent picture, by the way, by Tom Brenner for the New York Times. Congratulations, Tom. Nicely done. All right, here's the main body of the story. The email arrived in Washington before dawn. An official at the American Embassy in Beijing was urgently seeking advice from the State Department about an ethics question, that enclosed in scare quotes. And here's a quote from the email. I am writing to you because Mission China, that is to say the American mission in China, right? I'm writing to you because Mission China is in the midst of preparing for a visit from Department of Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao. The official wrote in October of 2017. Ms. Chao's office had made a series of unorthodox requests. When a Trumpster makes an unorthodox request, you know it's going to be a doozy. Unorthodox requests related to her first scheduled visit to China as a Trump cabinet member, according to people with knowledge of the email. Among them, asking federal officials to help coordinate travel arrangements for at least one family member and include relatives in meetings with government officials. And here is enclosed a redacted email about the trip. In China, the story continues, the Chaos are no ordinary family. And I had to stop here. This is where I wanted to contact Oliver Willis here. In China, the Chaos are no ordinary family. It occurs to me, the Chao, you know how Elaine Chao spells her name, C-H-A-O. Now, collectively, they are the Chaos, or as Greg would read it, the chaos. Are you kidding me? The family, the Elaine Chao, who's married to the majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and who is raking in the bucks hand over fist from the Chinese, while Trump conducts a disastrous trade war with the Chinese over their national industrial policy, by the way. And her family is the chaos, the Chaos. I thought that was rather remarkable, and I've noticed that before, and but it really didn't jump out at me the way it did today until now. Anyway, the Chaos are no ordinary family. They run an American shipping company with deep ties to the economic and political elite in China, where most of the company's business is centered. The trip was abruptly canceled by Ms. Chao after the ethics question was referred to officials in the state and transportation departments, and separately after the New York Times and others made inquiries about her itinerary and companions. She had these relatives who were fairly wealthy and connected to the shipping industry, said a State Department official who was involved in deliberations over the visit. Their business interests were potentially affected by meetings, which is a, potential problem, right? The move to notify Washington was unusual and a sign of how concerned the members of the State Department were, said the official, who was not authorized to speak on behalf of the agency. David H. Rank, another State Department official, learned of the matter after he stepped down as Deputy Chief of Mission in Beijing earlier in 2017. This was alarmingly inappropriate, he said, of the requests. The Transportation Department did not provide a reason for the trip's cancellation, though a spokesman later cited a cabinet meeting President Trump had called at the time. The spokesman said that there was no link between Ms. Chao's action as secretary and her family's business interests in China, which is ridiculous, and she probably wouldn't have taken the job if there wasn't. Ms. Chao has no formal affiliation or stake in her family's shipping business, Foremost Group. Sure, of course. But she and her husband, Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, have received millions of dollars in gifts from her father, James, who ran the company until last year. And Mr. McConnell's re-election campaigns have received more than $1 million in contributions from Ms. Chao's extended family, including from her father and her sister Angela, now Foremost's chief executive, who were both subjects of the State Department's ethics question. Over the years, Ms. Chow has repeatedly used her connections and celebrity status in China to boost the profile of the company, which benefits handsomely from the expansive industrial policies in Beijing that are at the heart of diplomatic tensions with the United States, according to interviews, industry filings, and government documents from both countries. Now, Ms. Chow is the top Trump official overseeing the American shipping industry, which is in steep decline and overshadowed by its Chinese competitors. We have to go a little further here to really get your flavor for what's happening behind the scenes. Her efforts on behalf of the family business, appearing at promotional events, joining her father in interviews with Chinese language media, have come as Foremost has interacted with the Chinese state to a remarkable degree for an American company. Foremost has received hundreds of millions of dollars in loan commitments from a bank run by the Chinese government, whose policies have been labeled by the Trump administration as threats to American security. The company's primary business, delivering China's iron ore and coal, I love coal, is intertwined with industries caught up in a trade war with the United States. That dispute stems in part from the White House's complaints that China is flooding the world with subsidized steel, undermining American producers. Foremost, though a relatively small company in its sector, is responsible for a large portion of orders at one of China's biggest state-funded shipyards. Not only are they in the shipping business, but they are in the business of bringing raw materials to shipyards to build more ships. Though they're a relatively small company in the sector, they're responsible for a large portion of orders at one of China's biggest state-funded shipyards and has secured long-term charters with a Chinese state-owned steelmaker, as well as global commodity companies that guarantee it steady revenues. In a rarity for foreigners, Angela and James Chow have served on the board of the holding company for China State Shipbuilding, the state-owned enterprise that makes ships for the Chinese military, along with Foremost and other customers. Angela Chow is also on the board at the Bank of China, a top lender to the shipbuilder, and a former vice chairman of the Council of China's Foreign Trade, a promotional group created by the Chinese government. And the Chinese government and the traders are not really up to anything down there at Mar-a-Lago or whatever. So, everything's cool, I'm sure. And Bank of China isn't totally a huge tenant in Trump Tower, blah, blah, blah. But no mention of that so far. It may come up later in the story, but we'll never know. Angela Chow, speaking in an interview with the New York Times on Friday, said that her board positions were unremarkable, emphasizing that Foremost did business around the world. She denied that the company had a China focus, beyond what most dry bulk carriers have in a world dominated by Chinese manufacturing. We are an international shipping company, and I'm an American, she said, adding, I don't think that if I didn't have a Chinese face, there would be any of this focus on China. Of course, I don't know that there would be any of China's focus on you either, but that's neither here nor there, except that it's actually kind of at the heart of everything. James Chow was not made available for an interview. A representative of the company received written questions from the Times 2 weeks ago, and the company responded with a fact sheet on Friday. Though Foremost worked in the late 1960s on American government contracts to ship rice to Vietnam, according to James Chow's biography, it has almost no footprint left in the United States, save for a modest corporate headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. It registers its ships in Liberia and Hong Kong, and owns them through companies in the Marshall Islands. Since Elaine Chao became Transportation Secretary, records show, the agency budget has repeatedly called to cut programs intended to stabilize the financially troubled maritime industry in the United States, moving to cut new funding for federal grants to small commercial shipyards and federal loan guarantees to domestic shipbuilders. Her agency's budget has also tried to slash spending for a grant program that helps keep 60 American-flagged ships in service, and has tried to scale back plans to buy new ships that would train Americans as crew members. In China, Ms. Chow's family has paid for scholarships and a ship simulator to train Chinese seamen, which is always a fun thing to have to discuss in the early morning. Congress, in bipartisan votes, has rejected the budget cuts, some of which have been offered up again for next year. One opponent of the cuts has been Representative Alan Lowenthal, a California Democrat whose district includes one of the nation's largest cargo ports. The Chinese government is massively engaged in maritime expansion as we have walked away from it, he said in an interview. There's going to come a crisis. Oh no, not another one. And we are going to call upon the U.S. maritime industry, and it's not going to be around. Elaine Chao, who declined to be interviewed, but the Transportation Agency provided a written statement from her. It's probably garbage and we can skip it. But here you got the basics of the story. As Transportation Secretary, she's doing nothing to help the American shipping industry, though she owns an American shipping company. So what's the conflict, right? Well, their American shipping company gets almost all of their business from China in sweetheart fixed state-sponsored deals. And no other American shipping company is ever going to be in a position to get any of those things, even if they do eventually come to be owned by Chinese operators, because their American infrastructure will wither and die. While, hers, of course, their shipping company, American infrastructure, has withered and died. It's just moved elsewhere. The other folks, not so much. And any hope that they had in the federal government assisting them in modernizing so that they can survive and compete with the Chows is conveniently being slashed by the Chows. Anyway, very interesting story. Much more to it, of course, and no time to get to it. Speaking of much more to things and no time to get to it, I'm happy to report I did actually go and I decided to buy a hard copy of the Mueller report over the weekend. And I decided, okay, it's my responsibility in all this to sit down and read this thing start to finish. And I made a pretty significant dent in it. I probably didn't buy the thing until late Saturday afternoon, maybe Saturday evening. And I am through, the report itself is almost 400 pages. I'm through 165 of the pages so far. And I will tell you this, it is boring. I mean, it's not as, it's going to be stultifying to most of you. It's not as boring as I thought it was going to be, and it's actually been a relatively quick read. For me, that was pretty good. Of course, a lot of it is redacted, so it makes it easy to skip large chunks of it, but it's still a good portion of it. It's been boring. I probably should have just skipped to Volume 2 and read that. That's the exciting stuff. Volume 1 is Russia. Volume 2 is obstruction of justice, and that's where the really bad stuff is, honestly. And as we know, the conclusion that Mueller draws, to the extent he draws anything, about what's in Volume 1 is, it looks terrible, there's a lot of bad optics, we can prove a lot of contacts, but we can't say for sure that if we took this case to trial, even if we were allowed to, that the evidence is so overwhelming that I would be positive of obtaining a conviction here. But there's lots of evidence of lots of things happening. Is it conclusive that I could say this would have been a eminently winnable case if we were allowed to charge it? No. Plus, I think from reading all the other stories, we knew a great deal of this. And so it's recounting contacts between Russians and Trump orbit people that we already knew about. There are a few things that I learned in it so far, but it looks like the fun stuff and the stuff we'll have more interest in discussing is in Volume 2. And I haven't gotten there yet, and I probably just should have started with it, but I wanted to be thorough. There was some weird stuff, though, and we'll probably spend some time discussing it. I also gave some thought to what to do with this report. And one thing I thought about was there's a fancy pants pub restaurant across the street from the bookstore that I picked this up at. I think it's a chain place, World of Beer. What do they have there? Well, okay. So I thought about what would happen if I just bought the Mueller report and I went over there and I just sat down and ordered some, as I said, the Kavanaugh juice. Keep the tab open so they keep serving me and don't throw me out for that reason. And I just started reading the Mueller report aloud. And I wondered, would people see what I was reading? Because it's printed in large red letters on the white cover here. They would see it pretty quickly. Hey, that guy's reading the Mueller report out loud. I kind of want to hear what's in the Mueller report, but don't want to read it myself, don't want to buy it, don't want to pay for the audio book, whatever. I'll go listen in on this. And I thought, ooh, what an interesting idea. Not that that's really for me. And I didn't want to spend all my time there either. But I figured also, somebody would just complain, and the waiter or manager would come over and say, listen, sir, you can stay here and eat and drink all you want, but you're bothering our customers with your loud reading, and it wouldn't even necessarily be about the content of what I was reading, just that I was reading it aloud and bothering people. But it's a pretty noisy place as it is, so I don't know. Maybe nobody would hear me at all. It made me think, though, I think that in the right places, you could probably pack a bar someplace if the right place in the right cities. If you said we're having a live reading of the Mueller report, instead of, live music today, people would probably go. You could probably pack a New York City bar with that, a Washington, D.C. bar with that. People would come and listen, especially if in New York City or something like that, or L.A., you got famous people to do the readings. I would think that would really pack people in. Not everybody. It's certainly not for everybody. 99% of the population would run as fast as they could in any other direction rather than hear that. But enough to fill a bar? Sure. I think you could get away with that. Then I thought about the possibility of taking the book home and say, I should just, in order to read it, I'll read it aloud to myself. I'll record it, and I'll make an audio book for everybody at, all the KITM listeners. You just slap a nominal price on the thing, make up for your time and your sore throat. But in reading through Volume 1, I said, you know what? That would be a waste of everybody's money. Maybe Volume 2. But if anybody's interested in something like that, if I read it, it would be about 300 hours long because I would comment on everything. But I might curse and leave it in there. Would you be interested? Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And, yes, look, I have to note this one here. All of you listening, endorsement alert, I see from Julie Briskman. Do you remember Julie Briskman? I told you about Julie Briskman running for county supervisor in Loudoun County, Virginia. Julie Briskman is, I guess, best known outside of Loudoun County, or maybe even inside Loudoun County, as the woman who gave Donald Trump the finger while she was biking by his motorcade on yet another one of his retreats from the golf trips. And she got fired from her job as a result, etc. Well, now she's running. She said run for something, and she's doing it. She's running against one of our local Republican loons who holds the seat at the moment. So she's announcing her endorsement by Jennifer Wexton, our new congresswoman out here, and some of you know who she is anyway. So Jennifer Wexton endorses Julie Briskman for supervisor, and she's got a bit of a national profile. We should turn that into a bit of a national-sized war chest so she can unseat our local Republican loon. One of the few surviving local Republicans, actually. Might as well sweep her out of office with someone like Julie. So just wanted to let you know about that. I retweeted that. You can pick up on that and probably follow her link to a great place where you can give her money. Very easy to do, I'm sure. Let's see. Couple of comments on the idea of the audiobook. Athena says she would like to have it with curses and commentary, please. And that's what would make it worth it, I'm sure. Arliss Bunny pointing out for me, yeah, this is true, right? The Mueller report is a free download on Audible. And as she says here, the easiest way to get through it is to listen while doing chores. And then when you hit something critical, note it in your hard copy. And probably, audiobooks put me to sleep, though. And I understand that's why you're doing it while you're doing chores. But my brain will break through the chore and put me to sleep, and then I won't have the chores done. I'm not good with that sort of, with audiobooks. I really just doze off no matter what's happening. And I like to be able to read and flip through, and you know how those things go. I had the hell of a time trying to get, it's supposed to be available as a free download in a number of places. The print version, and a couple other places are selling print versions too. And I guess maybe the size of the document just made it so unwieldy that iPads were crashing left and right. And I thought, all right, I'll just go buy the stupid thing. And I did. I also was like, oh yeah, it's a free download on Audible, but you know how those things go too, right? All right, well, all you got to do is sign up for your free trial with Audible, and then remember in 4 weeks or whatever that your free trial ends, and then they'll start charging you an arm and a leg. And I don't care as I told you, audiobooks put me to sleep anyway. So what am I going to do with a subscription to Audible? Except, I guess, go to sleep, which isn't a bad idea. There's a lot of apps out there that you pay for that are supposed to put you to sleep, which is a huge scam. Anyway, I guess it works and people are satisfied, but I mean, I could put you to sleep for free here on the radio show. That's not an app. That's what I should be doing. I should break into a different market. Do the show for those of you who want to listen to it here just fine, and then charge 99 cents an episode for people who want to go to sleep. That's where the real money is. That's how you make it in business these days, right? Find additional marketing channels for your product. Anyway, I don't know, audiobook, I didn't really want to do it. I wanted to sit down and read this thing, but I really should have just started with volume 2. That's my main complaint. Okay. Oh, look at this. Karen D has sent us something here on Trump's church photo. Replying to Scout Finch about this. I guess Scout Finch, I did see tweeting about that picture. Say, what is wrong with his pants? What is up with this? She says, someone, not me, said Trump is 5'11", but his pants are 6'3". Seriously, didn't recognize him without the makeup and hairspray. Maybe that's why they oranged up, allegedly, his face in this photo I have here. Yeah, now that I'm looking at it, it is looking a little more orangey in the face, but I think the stance is 100% real. Although they may have, I don't know, there might be a different, more orange head on the body there, because it does look a little small. So he's looking a little Frankensteinish in that picture. All right. At any rate, where were we before we left off? Oh, yes, right. The question of whether or not I should do a Mueller report plus commentary and cursing. And I guess I'll let you know whether volume 2 is more exciting and we eventually get to the point where I say, I think we can make a real product out of this thing. All right, let's see. Other stories that require attention today. There was one thing so far, by the way, in the Mueller report, the one thing that I pulled out that I said, hey, this is interesting, was where I even made a note for myself somewhere in the table of contents. You're going to hear me flipping through here. Nice sounds. It could make another one of those ASMR videos of me flipping the pages of the Mueller report saying, he's guilty. He's guilty. Look, he's even guiltier here. This would probably work. All right. Yes, in which section are we in now? Page 78 of the report itself. And I bought a version that has some garbage in the front, forewords and analysis and stuff. So I have to give you the pages by the report page in case you're reading one of the PDFs. It is, where are we here? Volume 1, section or whatever, 4, Roman numeral 4, Russian government links to and contacts with the Trump campaign. Subsection A, campaign period. That would be September 2015 to November 8th, 2016. Number 1, with regard to the Trump Tower Moscow project. 1D, discussions about Russia travel by Michael Cohen or candidate Trump from December of 2015 to June of 2016. Lowercase, I guess, Roman numeral 2, candidate Trump's opportunities to travel to Russia. On page 78, I was introduced to a character I had not run into before, about which I learned a little something. Let's see. This was... Where is he first mentioned? He comes in on page... I guess that's the beginning of the section. He comes in... here we are, on page 80, in fact. I guess maybe this begins on... Is his first mention on 79? Yeah, here we are. At approximately the same time that the letter was being prepared, and this was a letter from letters as between Trump and Deputy Prime Minister Priodko that Rona Graf was handling for Trump regarding an invitation to the 2016 an economic forum in St. Petersburg. I think this is the thing that was referred to at some point as the Davos of Russia. And Russian businessmen and government figures were interested, allegedly, in getting Trump to come to the event and to speak. At approximately the same time the letter was being prepared, and the letter was, I think, they say in the report about, I'm not going to this. I can't. It's just the timing stinks. At approximately the same time the letter was being prepared, Robert Forsman, this is the guy I hadn't read much about before. This was the interesting part. Robert Forsman, a New York-based investment banker, began reaching out to Graf, Rona, his assistant, to secure an in-person meeting with candidate Trump. According to Forsman, who had been asked by Anton Kobyakov, a Russian presidential aide involved with the Roscongress Foundation, to see if Trump could speak at the forum. Forsman first emailed Graf on March 31st, 2016, following a phone introduction brokered through Trump business associate Mark Burnett, who produced the television show The Apprentice. In his email, Forsman referenced his long-standing personal and professional expertise in Russia and Ukraine. And this is the part that raised my eyebrows. His work setting up an early private channel, because that was like an eyebrow raiser for Kushner, right? An early private channel. Wait a minute, he's trying to have a private channel with the Russian government? What's this about? Forsman is bragging on his work setting up an early private channel between Vladimir Putin and former U.S. President George W. Bush. And it goes on from there, and blah, blah, blah. But I don't recall hearing much about someone trying to arrange an early, and possibly too early, private channel between Vladimir Putin and Bush. And I'm just thinking back that, Bush had the same problem with Putin. Oh, Pooty Poot. I looked into his eyes and I saw his soul. He's a good man, And I think by the end, he sort of began to realize that that was kind of a dumb thing to have said way back. But as Bush's first impressions of Putin was just like Trump. He's the guy we should be listening to. He's a good guy. I can see into his soul. Pooty Poot. He's a good friend of mine. All that kind of that's a very W approach to buddying up to Putin. But it's essentially the same thing. And I don't remember hearing anything about this. What's up with this Robert Forsman guy? And Forsman has donated on both sides of the aisle. He's a Wall Street type person. So that's, we're susceptible to that, I suppose. And a lot of you would like to end that. And I think we all would like to see it cease. But that's where it is. But, I don't know. Note for the future. And Forsman makes a couple of appearances in Volume 1. I ain't done yet. There's probably more about it, but I just want to sort of put his name on the record. Who remembers that? Any of you remember Trump? You all remember Trump buddying up to Putin, but do you remember specifically that there was word that he was trying to establish an early, that's a key word, the early back channel to Putin? Because I don't. And we should have impeached him for that, among other things. All right, let's see. There's lots more out there, and gosh, I don't know which way to go for all these things. Many stories to catch up on, and maybe we'll go here because A, it's next in pocket, and B, it has to do with Mitch McConnell, and so sort of we're making a transition from the Elaine Chao story, even though this Mueller report story got in the way. Then we can move over to the next couple of things I want to touch on. It's Will Bunch in the Inquirer, Philly Inquirer. Mitch McConnell's democracy-crushing smirk, you remember that, is why just getting rid of Trump isn't enough. So this will help us transition into impeachment thoughts. This combines the last two things. A Mueller report, which is obviously impeachment-focused, and the Chaos family, which is obviously about Mitch McConnell. So let's read a little bit of this. It ain't too long. So, this is how liberty dies, with a hideous, utterly shameless smirk on the face of arguably the most cynical political leader in American history, as the warriors of his political tribe cackle with laughter. This, I think, thinking about, talking about what we heard about last week, about the ease with which he's doing the Gimitarian reversal on judges and Supreme Court appointments in the last year or of a presidency or an election year, right? The end came Tuesday in about the most out-of-the-way venue you could imagine, a Chamber of Commerce luncheon in Paducah, Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell, the 77-year-old son of bluegrass country, now one of America's three most powerful politicians as Senate Majority Leader, was finally asked the question that's long been on people's minds about how he might handle an unexpected Supreme Court vacancy if one occurs during the 2020 presidential election. It was in 2016, you surely remember, that Justice Antonin Scalia suddenly died, and McConnell wouldn't even allow then-President Barack Obama's nominee, a thoroughly decent federal appeals court judge named Merrick Garland, chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, actually, to get a hearing. This wasn't, McConnell insisted at the time, what it looked like, denying Obama his constitutional power to fill a vacancy that was never questioned for the 42 white, it actually says that in parentheses, cough, cough, white presidents who came before him, and a naked power play to make sure pro-business judges set our laws for the next 40 years. Is it not 43 who came before him? All right, well, whatever. No, the Senate leader told us this was about the highest democratic principles, that the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. That's a quote. While also claiming political precedents that didn't really exist. 3 years later, McConnell is now telling us that the people's voice is only audible when it's Republican voters looking to replace a Democratic POTUS. Oh, we'd fill it, McConnell said Tuesday, unable to suppress his laughter that quickly spread through a room of Kentuckians who also see the lighter side of 21st century neo-fascism. He prattled on for a minute or two about the importance of a permanent wall of judges, which, in his words, cannot be undone. Impeach them. You can do it. It's actually real, by the way. A vast majority of impeachments that the Senate handles are judicial impeachments, by the way. That's just proof of how a U.S. government that fails to enshrine one person, one vote, neither in the Electoral College nor the small state rural dominance of the Senate can, with the aid of McConnell's ruthless realpolitik, create a judiciary that will control women's bodies while cramming pro-corporate pablum down the throat of a nation that gives more popular votes to Democrats running for president, 6 out of the last 7 times, and for our hopelessly gerrymandered Congress. McConnell's comment got some news coverage, but not as much as it should have. For one thing, the Senate leader's amoral political cynicism has been barely concealed, if at all, ever since the dawn of the Obama presidency, when he declared the goal of what was once known years ago as the world's greatest deliberative body was no longer to pass laws, but to deny Obama a second term. And a lot of important news gets drowned underneath the Iowa-level flooding that is President Trump's daily barrage of inane tweets and increasingly dictatorial policy pronouncements. But May 28, 2019 should be marked on the calendar of American history as the day that democracy was taken off life support and officially declared dead, because there's no longer even the slightest pretense of pretending that the ancient words of the U.S. Constitution, fealty to the rule of law, and 243 years of imperfectly upheld democratic norms matter anymore. McConnell and Trump, soon to be helped, no doubt, by the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court, are now in an arms race to see who can blow up America's founding documents faster through illegal wars and arms deals, tariffs by dictatorial fiat, ignoring subpoenas, and now judicial orders, all with that same knowing smirk. Let's quickly review a couple more of McConnell's past and probable future crimes against democracy, lest you think that this was an exaggeration. For all the justified talk about efforts to cover up the extent of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, arguably no actor did more damage than McConnell, who in September of that fateful year explicitly blocked the Obama administration from warning the public about Vladimir Putin's ploy and from taking stricter measures to stop it. Then, in a cynical ploy almost as shameless as his Supreme Court flip-flop, he used April's release of the Mueller report to blame it all on Obama. In 2019, McConnell is blocking bills that might prevent Russian interference in 2020. What does McConnell get out of his less than vigilant approach to Russian meddling in our democracy? One of his biggest donors, a whopping $3.5 million to McConnell's leadership PAC, is Russian-born U.S. citizen Len Blavatnik, who's maintained close ties in his homeland and has business partnerships with two Russian oligarchs who've figured prominently in Trump-tied scandals, Viktor Vekselberg and Oleg Deripaska. McConnell recently used his Senate clout to get U.S. sanctions lifted on Deripaska and his large aluminum company, Rusal, which promptly announced a plan to invest $200 million in a new plant in McConnell's Kentucky. His biggest home state newspaper wrote flatly that, quote, Kentucky might be going into business with the Russian mafia, unquote. Since Trump's election, McConnell has taken a running tit-for-tat with Democrats over judicial nominations to its ultimate nuclear extreme, ramming through not just the president's two high-profile Supreme Court picks, but more than 100 federal judicial nominees, the vast majority of them white men, naturally, while refusing to even consider a slew of progressive bills like the Equality Act, sent over since this winter by a Democrat-led House. These judges will guarantee for decades a legal order that protects the white patriarchy and business elites in opposition to the will of the American people, who are becoming ever younger, more diverse, and less enamored with the inequality baked into today's capitalism. Believe it or not, things could get worse. This week there were reports that if the House carries out its constitutional duty and votes to impeach Trump after airing the evidence in public hearings, McConnell and his Senate won't bother to conduct a proper trial, as was held for Bill Clinton in 1999, but stage a brief kangaroo court to absolve the president. That would be the equivalent of firing another round of bullets into democracy's already motionless corpse. The contrast right now between the two centers of power on Capitol Hill could not be greater. In the House, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, with her ability to keep a ridiculously diverse Democratic caucus together, both to win votes and to support her leadership, has been America's best traditional lawmaker since LBJ. But the traditions that she honors, as shown by her reluctance to confront the ongoing assault on the rule of law with Trump's impeachment, are those of the 20th century, and they are getting steamrolled by the lack of respect that either Trump or McConnell hold for the unwritten rules of the democracy road. As McConnell's stranglehold on 21st century American politics becomes clear, there's been something of a cottage industry to discover why Mitch does what he does, to somehow find the soul inside this democracy-crushing machine. Within the last year, the New York Times Magazine invested months of reporting on McConnell, including interviews seeking to find the motive. There was nothing there. The Kentuckian's life journey, from a young man who was ambitious but with a dollop or two of idealism, learning from a popular center-left war hero, Senator John Sherman Cooper, hearing the words of Martin Luther King, if not absorbing them, to a power-crazed institutionalist, isn't unique, but his long, strange trip has been even more amoral than most. It's pointless to ask why about Mitch McConnell. The only question that matters going into 2020 is how. How can McConnell be stopped? In the long term, his rise and his unholy reign pose hard questions about the very nature of American democracy and its foundation, whether the constitutional checks and balances of a Senate that gives citizens in Wyoming so much more power than their fellow Americans in California make sense in today's world. But McConnell's assault on democracy can also be stopped in the short run. For starters, the Senate Majority Leader is up for re-election in 2020, And even if you don't live or vote in Kentucky, any American can donate or volunteer to help his election opponents. But even if that falls short, Democrats can end McConnell's reign as leader and make sure he's not thwarting the replacements for aging Supreme Court justices like Ruth Bader Ginsburg or Stephen Breyer, with a net gain of 3 or 4 Senate seats. For anyone who cares about keeping liberty alive, beating McConnell next year is every bit as important as beating Trump. That's why it's so frustrating that the elites of the Democratic Party don't seem to get it. Rather than making a reclamation of the Senate the national moral crusade that it needs to be, the allure of the Trumpian reality show has sucked the top tier of potential candidates. Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro of Texas, Steve Bullock of Montana, and Stacey Abrams of Georgia into the presidential race or related pursuits. Vanity and short-sightedness could leave a President Warren or Harris or Biden one vote short in 2021 of the progress that their voters demanded. The only good news is that the 2020 general election is still 16 months away, plenty of time for the Democrats and concerned voters to shift gears, make the Senate a priority, keep liberty alive, and wipe the smirk off Mitch McConnell's face. That would be pretty nice. I think it would be a great way of wrapping up 2020, to be sure. All right. I think maybe we have a theme we can continue with here. I got 2 different directions to go, but let me add a tweet thread from Yoni Applebaum and a piece in The Atlantic to your database, if you will, before moving on to, wrapping things up. And then Tuesday we can, of course, continue this theme. We'll still be wanting to impeach Donald Trump and lots to do and catch up on in considering how it would be done. But because McConnell's story here brought judges into the picture, I think this is a good follow-up. Again, Yoni Applebaum, now ideas editor at The Atlantic. And so, of course, will have his eye on this piece in The Atlantic. Is it his piece? Let me, where did it open? It didn't. Why is that? Okay, well, let's see if I can click on it that way. No, it is Julian Davis Mortenson's piece, What 2 Crucial Words in the Constitution Actually Mean, is the name of the piece. But let's read Yoni's discussion of it here first. There's a quiet revolution, he says, underway in constitutional studies, and we've got 2 entries from it up this morning. Oh, I thought there was just one. Digital methods are transforming our understanding of the field. What exactly does he mean? Second tweet here. How do we understand the original meaning of constitutional terms? And is it really even necessary, I guess? J.D. Mortenson looked at more than 1,000 contemporary texts and produced a finding of tectonic importance about these 2 words, which are executive power. That's the 2 crucial words in the Constitution and what they actually mean. His third tweet here. Digital methods are also changing how we understand contemporary debates. David Posen and his colleagues used machine learning to show a recent sharp divergence in constitutional rhetoric. In a piece here, which I guess I'll also open up, but now I'm pretty sure I won't be able to get to. Republicans and Democrats are describing 2 different constitutions. Subheaded here, conservatives and liberals both cite the nation's charter, but they're not talking about the same parts of it. That's true. And I did see over the weekend somebody asking, what part of the Constitution says the rhetorical question. And the answer to that, of course, being literally the actual answer that they teach in conservative law school classes is the Constitution in exile, as they like to call it. There's an official name for this, this nebulous concept of the Constitution as the founders really truly meant it to be, but nobody else in modern America believes to be the case. is known as the Constitution in Exile to them. They're bringing it back from exile and allowing it to rule the United States as it rightfully should be. The fourth tweet here, which I think wraps it up for Yoni, which is great because the break's coming. Like most scholarly revolutions, this one will take some time to filter into the courts, but it will happen. And research like this on executive power will become the texts on which future decisions pivot. Let's read some of those pieces after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm trying to find that tweet that I actually responded to with the mention of the Constitution in exile. That probably happened, I don't know, maybe Friday afternoon or Saturday, but not necessary for us to continue on with the rest of this story. So I guess we'll stay on the serious stuff and see if we can't get through a little bit of it and bring in these Atlantic pieces just to give you something heavy to think about on the way out of the program today. So first up, Julian Davis Mortensen, professor of law at the University of Michigan, with what 2 crucial words in the Constitution actually mean. I reviewed more than 1,000 publications from the founding era and discovered that executive power simply doesn't imply what most scholars thought. I added simply on that one, but okay. Let's read it. Is the president a king? Usually we say no to that, right? The question may sound absurd, but you'd be surprised. A great many lawyers, politicians, judges, and policy experts think the U.S. Constitution builds from exactly that starting point. Their argument relies on the first sentence of Article 2, which gives the president, quote, the executive power, unquote. And remember, Donald Trump just said the other day, have you read this beautiful thing called Article 2? It gives me unbelievable powers. You wouldn't believe it. And I think that's what started this. That phrase, they claim, was originally understood as a generic reference to monarchical authority. This means, they say, that the American president must have been given all the prerogatives of a British king, except where the Constitution specifies otherwise. The foreign relations scholar Philip Trimble states their conclusion plainly. Quote, unless the Article 2 vesting clause is meaningless, it incorporates the unallocated parts of royal prerogative, unquote. The repercussions of this claim ripple across the face of constitutional law. During Senate hearings on legislating an end to the Iraq War, Brad Berenson, who had served as one of President George W. Bush's top lawyers, told the Senate that the Executive Power Clause conveys, quote, a vast reserve of implied authority to do whatever may be necessary in executing the laws and governing the nation, unquote. I mean, think John Yoo. Depends why the president would want to do that. Think Alberto Gonzalez saying that federal judges were not qualified to pass on questions of national security. Think Condoleezza Rice when asked if the Congress were to deauthorize the Iraq War, what would you do? And the answer was we would defy that. We would simply defy those orders. Okay, so have that in mind as we continue on. When the Bush administration wanted to defy statutory restrictions on dragnet surveillance, the Justice Department relied on the clause in advising the Congress that Congress, quote, cannot restrict the president's ability to engage in warrantless searches that protect the national security, unquote. And Justice Clarence Thomas put the clause front and center in concluding that, quote, those who ratified the Constitution understood the executive power vested by Article II to include those foreign affairs powers not otherwise allocated in the Constitution. These aren't selective examples. Pick a random recent controversy about presidential power, and you're almost certain to find the president as king claim woven into the debates. During the George W. Bush administration, the argument was used to defend the torture of prisoners, the evasion of habeas corpus, and the claim of authority to invade Afghanistan and Iraq without congressional authorization. During the Obama administration, the argument surfaced in debates about the administration's defiance of a statute recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and about the use of force against Libya. And supporters of the Trump administration have supercharged the claim, advocating a breathtaking theory of indefensible imperial prerogative in areas ranging from the Russia investigation and workaday congressional oversight to immigration law and the bombing of Syria. You know, we're all talking about the unitary executive here, right? After years of research into an enormous array of colonial, revolutionary, and founding era sources, I'm here to tell you that as a historical matter, this president as king claim is utterly and totally wrong, as you might have imagined, I would add. I've reviewed more than 1,000 publications from the 17th and 18th centuries for each instance of the word root exec, and have read most of those texts from cover to cover with the topic of presidential power squarely in mind. I've read every discussion of executive power and presidential authority that appears in the gigantic compilation of archival materials known as the Documentary History of the Ratification of the United States Constitution. And with the help of a team of research assistants, I'm most of the way through fly-specking the full records of the Continental Congress, including committee reports, floor debates, and delegate correspondence, with the same question in mind. All of this work has left me with both the confidence to share this conclusion and the sense of obligation to do so as bluntly as possible. It's not a close call. It's just not a close call. The historical record categorically refutes the idea that the American revolutionaries gave their new president an unspecified array of royal prerogatives. To the contrary, the presidency that leaps off the pages of the founders' debates, diaries, speeches, letters, poems, and essays was an instrument of the law, subject to the law of the land, and both morally and legally obliged to obey the law of the land. If you had the same third grade history class I did, you might think all this goes without saying. But in the realm of constitutional law, these findings represent a tectonic shift. For more than 2 centuries, jurists and statesmen have intoned that ours is a government of limited powers. That proposition is the foundational principle of federal power. The Constitution did not grant Congress open-ended authority to regulate in the public interest. Instead, the founders wrote a laundry list of highly specific legislative authorities. This enumeration strategy, the Supreme Court has explained, is why courts must carefully consider the national government's legislative limits. If no enumerated power authorizes Congress to pass a certain law, that law may not be enacted. From this starting point comes the endless constitutional sparring over the scope of the powers to regulate commerce, to tax, to spend, and to enter into treaties, just to name a few. Almost everyone agrees that unless legislators can point to an affirmative grant of constitutional authority, Congress simply can't act. A funny thing happens, though, when it comes to the presidency. Suddenly, you see hand-waving that would be laughed out of the room just about anywhere else. Here's Justice Robert Jackson on executive power in 1952. A judge, like an executive advisor, may be surprised at the poverty of really useful and unambiguous authority applicable to concrete problems of executive power as they actually present themselves. Just what our forefathers did envision must be divined from materials almost as enigmatic as the dreams Joseph was called upon to interpret for Pharaoh. This is one of the most celebrated opinions in constitutional history. Is Jackson seriously advising us to approach problems of presidential power by meditating on curtsying wheat and overweight cows? The answer is obviously no. But such sorcerous gesticulations, getting a little fancy on me here, are motivated by an inconvenient fact. The constitutional text doesn't actually authorize the president to do very much. It enumerates the veto, appointments, and pardon powers. It grants the president, quote, the executive power, unquote, and the office of commander-in-chief. It authorizes the president to receive foreign ambassadors, demand reports from his subordinates, and deliver a State of the Union address. But aside from a few miscellaneous process authorities, that's just about it. The way president as king theorists see it, this fact is more than just inconvenient, it's downright dangerous. Can we imagine a country, they ask, whose president doesn't have the authority to conduct diplomacy, recognize foreign governments, terminate treaties, acquire territory, fire officers and employees, or announce national policy? Is it conceivable, they wonder, that our national charter would fail to include an escape hatch, in case of emergency, break this law, for any legal requirement that interferes with our national security? For president as king theorists, to ask these questions is to answer them, and so they claim that the first three words of Article 2, the executive power, vest all the authorities I've just described and more. As a historical matter, my research shows that this claim is dead wrong. The executive power granted at the American founding was conceptually, legally, and semantically incapable of conveying a reservoir of royal authority. The real meaning of executive power was something almost embarrassingly simple: the power to execute the law. Overwhelming evidence for this point pervades both the founders' debates and the legal and political theory on which their discussions drew. Listen to how Gouverneur Morris framed the problem for his fellow delegates in Philadelphia. The central challenge of constitutional governance, he said, was to safely distribute each of the three powers that everyone knew so well. One, the power of making, another of executing, that's interesting, executing, and a third of judging each of the laws, of course. Making, another of executing, and a third of judging the laws. Under this tripartite system, the function of executive power was both straightforward and indispensable: to implement instructions issued by a valid exercise of legislative power. In a famous 1774 Election Day sermon, Gad Hitchcock stated the consequence plainly: the executive power is strictly no other than the legislative carried forward, and of course, controllable by it. These weren't idiosyncratic views. The catechistic statement, of three interlocking powers served as a universal grammar for debating constitutional governance. As one exasperated British reviewer said of the relentless Trinitarianism of John Adams's 1787 constitutional treatise, upon this point, like Lord Chesterfield with the Graces, Dr. Adams dwells forever. And so, the historical Constitution just wasn't that complicated. It defined the president's fundamental role as the servant of legislative will. It gave the president a conditional veto to check Congress's exercise of that will in any particular case, and it vested a smattering of other authorities where Article 2 specifically said so. But that was it. The very doctrine of prerogative and such other peculiar properties of the royal character, one Virginia newspaper explained, were conceptually incompatible with the view of these states when they are settling the form of a republican government. The defining fact of the Constitution's separation of powers was the structural minimalism of its presidency. Because the president's powers were so clearly defined, a South Carolina Federalist concluded, they, quote, never can be dangerous, unquote. Did this leave gaps in the constitutional system as ratified in 1789? Of course it did. But the founders weren't idiots. They knew that no legal text can anticipate every possible eventuality, so they made specific provisions for Congress to decide how to fill any gaps in the system. The constitutional text on this point could scarcely be more explicit. The national legislature is expressly authorized to make, quote, all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution any of the powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. The first Congress took up that invitation and ran with it, just like its successors have ever since, conveying those powers to the executive branch by statute that the constantly evolving democratic process deems necessary for the president to have. It's not like this vision of the presidency leads to weakness or irresolution. Under the modern administrative state, the vast statutory framework authorizes a spectacular range of presidential authorities, but as a matter of the original constitutional understanding, all such powers are subject to legislative revision. And that's what the founders expected. You can advocate originalism in constitutional interpretation. You can support the imperial presidency, but you can't do both at the same time. An interesting observation, to be sure, and some good back and forth in the rest of that thread between Yoni Applebaum and others commenting on it, including Norm Ornstein commenting on it, and bringing us around to the concept of the unitary executive. So you might want to take a quick look over there at that one. So the other piece that was mentioned, David Posen, Columbia Law School professor, another Columbia, two professors at Columbia Law, David Posen and Eric Talley, and then Julian Nyarko, a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia Law School, who wrote the piece, Republicans and Democrats are describing two different constitutions. Let's see, can we churn through that one before winding up for the day? And there's an update, too. Democratic and Republican politicians agree on one thing about President Donald Trump's tax returns. The Constitution determines who can see them. Democrats, such as Representative David Cicilline, insists that Congress needs access to fulfill its constitutional responsibilities of oversight and evaluate possible violations of the Constitution's emoluments clauses. Thank you. Republicans, such as Representative Bradley Byrne, insist that the House Ways and Means Committee's request for the returns raises, quote, questions of grave constitutional significance, unquote. According to Republican Senator Chuck Grassley, the request goes beyond what the framers of the Constitutions had in mind when they created Article 1. Statements such as these illustrate something important about how the Constitution figures in public life. Elected officials from both parties appeal routinely to the nation's foundational document, but far from serving as a symbol of unity and common purpose, the Constitution has come to enable or even exacerbate partisan strife. In political debates such as the Trump tax tussle, it often feels as if the United States has two legal charters, one for Republicans and another for Democrats. It feels that way all the time, I'd say. That's not just an anecdotal impression. The tools of computational analysis shed light on how wide the chasm has grown. The three of us recently examined the evolution of constitutional rhetoric on the floor of Congress from 1873 to 2016. We first identified the hundreds of thousands of remarks that referred to the Constitution. We then trained a machine learning classifier to predict, based solely on the content of the remarks, whether Republicans or Democrats were speaking. If the algorithm finds this task hard to do, it implies that the parties are apt to talk in similar or overlapping ways. By contrast, if the algorithm performs this task with a high degree of accuracy, it implies that the parties are largely talking past each other. The results are sobering. Since around 1980, it has become increasingly easy for an algorithm to predict whether any given constitutional remark was made by a Republican or a Democrat. And it may have something to do with the difference between today's Republicans and Democrats and the Republicans and Democrats of 1873 and some of the earlier days, I wonder. It has likewise become increasingly easy to predict whether the speaker was a conservative or a liberal. That's the better question. But by the time Trump took office, the machine was guessing right roughly 80% of the time, and an all-time high by historic standards. This result holds up across multiple machine learning classifiers, multiple measures of algorithmic accuracy, and multiple criteria for what counts as a constitutional remark. Additional tests of the disjointness between the parties' rhetoric point to the same conclusion. To an unprecedented extent, Republicans and Democratic members of Congress no longer speak the same constitutional language. Underlying this polarization of constitutional discourse, we further found are competing constitutional vocabularies. Terms dating back to the ratification of the original Constitution in the late 1700s have become relatively associated with the Republican Party. For instance, today's conservatives are more likely to use the phrase Founding Fathers and cite textual provisions such as the First, Second, and 10th Amendments, emphasizing themes of individual liberty and autonomy of the states. Terms from or about the Reconstruction Amendments of 1865 to 70, on the other hand, have become relatively associated with the Democratic Party. Democrats are more likely to deploy the phrases civil rights and voting rights in particular, emphasizing themes of equality and federal authority. The perennial tension in constitutional law between the values of the founding and the values of Reconstruction, as the law professor Kermit Roosevelt has described it, is today a highly partisan struggle. Even more so than the fight over Trump's tax returns, the ongoing debate over a high-profile Democratic electoral reform bill shows how this struggle plays out. After House Democrats introduced H.R. 1 in January, Republicans insisted that the bill would, quote, limit Americans' First Amendment rights to political speech. That was Senator Mitch McConnell. Would encroach on, quote, the liberties and powers of the Constitution reserved for the states and the people. That was Representative Jeff Duncan. And undermine, quote, the original intent of the founders, unquote, from Representative Barry Loudermilk. Democrats countered that the bill would provide crucial protections for the, quote, constitutional right to vote. That was Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. And help redeem a constitution that was flawed at its inception by not recognizing the full equality of every American. That was Jeff Merkley. As these remarks reflect, members of each party follow a certain constitutional script. The details change depending on the issue. The broad interpretive themes and ideological fault lines stay the same. Instead of transcending pre-existing political divides, arguments framed in constitutional terms thus tend to mirror or magnify those divides. Since 1980, discourse about the Constitution has polarized at least as rapidly as discourse about other matters, on most measures, even more rapidly. Any number of legal thinkers might have imagined the Constitution as supplying a kind of cultural glue that disciplines disagreement and tempers partisan passions. But at least in recent decades, our findings suggest something closer to the opposite. The two sides also rely on constitutional arguments to different degrees over time. During the 1960s and early 1970s, Democratic legislators invoked their preferred constitutional clauses and tropes far more often than Republican legislators invoked theirs. By the turn of the millennium, the situation had flipped. Of the 50 constitutional terms that were most strongly owned by one of the parties under President Barack Obama, fully 3/4, from freedom of speech to bear arms to commander-in-chief, belonged to Republicans. Democrats may have dominated the constitutional discourse in the Capitol at the height of the civil rights movement, but Republicans have caught up, and then some. Although it is hard to measure the impact of such rhetorical reversal, qualitative evidence suggests that it has emboldened a variety of actors in the GOP coalition, including judges, and contributed to the growing use of hardball tactics on the right. This confronts Democrats with a choice. One option is to accept the asymmetry and continue to emphasize non-constitutional narratives. Yet, insofar as the Constitution really is America's civil religion, future Democrats who wish to enact transformative legislative programs may need to develop a more robust higher law language with which to make their case. The alternative is not just constitutional polarization, but constitutional marginalization, and the kinds of political setbacks that you don't need a computer algorithm to track. That is kind of deep and overarching as a theme. And I'm reminded that also, let's say another story hanging out there, if I can dig it up, there's probably not much chance of actually getting all the way through as a topic. But I did see tweeted, and I guess I will just share the tweet and my reaction to it over the weekend, a story once again highlighting the existence of what is essentially a sort of ALEC for judges. I think speaking of, I guess, what are now known as the Manny lectures, Henry Manny's lectures series in government and law, or not government law, in law and economics. I'm sorry, the wrong combination of my various degrees coming to mind here. But it was just, I think I was rather surprised to see it reported as though it was something new. Although, I understand you got to bash people over the head with this several times. Here it is, from Vox. How a resort weekend for judges made courts more conservative. And it is everything that you thought it was if you've ever heard me speak about this thing. And I had to comment on it like, yeah, this program, as they point out in the article, is nearly 45 years old, has been reported on dozens of times, and still requires every bit of attention being paid to it here. But impeachment, by the way, hasn't topped 50% in over 2 weeks of talking about it, so forget it. But just by way, I only add the impeachment thing in there by way of pointing out that it takes repeated efforts to discuss any topic with people in order to move public opinion on it. People don't hear you the first time. People were busy. They didn't get it. I didn't see the tweet. I didn't read the article. It happened before I was born, whatever it may be. But this is a Dylan Matthews and Bird Pinkerton stab at a story that's been reported several times over the past decade, and I'm glad they're reporting it again. How a resort weekend for judges made courts more conservative. Judges who went to the seminars were likelier to rule against unions and environmental regulations, they point out in the subheader. That is because these are law and economics seminars designed to teach judges how to do exactly that. These confusing cases that might puzzle judges as to how to approach them. Well, we'll give you a framework. It just happens to be a conservative one. But law, that's a good thing. Economics, that's also a good thing. Law and economics. What's conservative about that? And that's the way it works. I'll give you a couple paragraphs here. Ideas have consequences. I'm only going to give you one or two because it's time to wrap up. That's the title of a recent paper by economists Elliot Ash, Daniel Chen, and Suresh Naidu. And depending on your political beliefs, the consequences they're talking about are either heartening or deeply disturbing. Ash, Chen, and Naidu studied the Manne, M-A-N-N-E, Economics Institute for Federal Judges, a program offering economics instruction to federal judges so that they could incorporate economic reasoning into their papers, their decisions. Launched in 1976 by legal academic Henry Manne with the support of corporations and conservative funders like the Olin Foundation. Recognize that one? My first project on Decosapedia was on the Olin Foundation. The Institute was one of the most effective disseminators of law and economics, a movement in legal academia that sought to incorporate analysis of economic efficiency and incentives into the study of law. On its own, that sounds benign enough, and distinguished liberal lawyers and judges like Ruth Bader Ginsburg even went to these seminars. Elizabeth Warren met her husband at a Manne event for law professors. But Ash, Chen, and Naidu find that the training in the programs had a conservative or libertarian bent, and that this shows up in the behavior of judges who attended. Well worth reading, well worth digesting, well worth doing again in another 6 months, as a matter of fact. But for now, it is time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What do we got on tap for today? Let's see. The supposed secrecy of Flynn intercepts and Barr's suspicious decision to ignore a federal judge's order over their release is merely meant to complicate the legal proceedings by any means necessary. We're back on theme here. Italy serves former Trump advisor Steve Bannon with an eviction notice. Oh, it was all about paperwork. Check that story out. The Supreme Court made it easier for the police to arrest you for filming them. Oh. And Mnuchin only cares about memos that say he doesn't have to release Trump's taxes. There's more, of course, from the international side, and I'll try and sneak that in after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, here's what we've got here. The Pentagon hasn't bothered to brief the press for 368 days. That's more than a year, in case you didn't know. And the execution of North Korean senior official and former top nuclear envoy Kim Yong-chol was greatly exaggerated. Or maybe good, I should say. Let's find out more next.